Welcome to the Uncanny Valley podcast. Today, we're embarking on a journey back in time, not just to a distant historical event, but really to the very foundation of Western literature. We're talking about Homer's Iliad, an epic poem that has, shaped our understanding of heroes, gods, and the very nature of conflict itself. But beyond the battles and the legends, beyond just the sheer scale of it all, there's something subtly unsettling, something almost, well, uncanny about this ancient masterpiece and the peculiar figures who inhabit its pages. It's like looking at one of those perfectly rendered digital human faces that feels almost, maybe not quite, real intensely familiar and yet also subtly alien.
Indeed. And we'll be exploring not just the story itself, but also the fascinating, often really contentious discussions that have surrounded it for centuries. Questions about its mysterious authorship, the unsettling nature of its divine interventions, and the deeply human yet often perplexing characters who populate its pages. It's a work that, despite its immense age, still feels incredibly immediate, doesn't it? It resonates with our own contemporary conflicts and emotions. Yet, at the same time, it evokes that subtle sense of discomfort, that familiar yet foreign feeling that really defines the uncanny valley.
Exactly. It's been said that Homer, Socrates, and Shakespeare have contributed more to the intellectual enlightenment of mankind than any other three writers. Yet Homer's own history is shrouded in, well, a boundless ocean of discussion. So today, our mission is to try and navigate that ocean, to sort of extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight, and to uncover what makes this poem resonate so powerfully, even with those peculiar elements that pull us into that, familiar but unsettling space. We're here to help you truly understand why this ancient text continues to grip us. So, if the Iliad is such a foundational text, like a cornerstone of Western thought and literature, the first uncanny mystery we bump into isn't really in the story itself, but in the author. It's unfortunate for us that of some of the greatest men we know least and talk most. How can a work so impactful, a story that's influenced countless authors and shaped our very understanding of heroism and tragedy, be tied to such a mysterious figure? We know so much about the meticulous craft within the Iliad, the intricate details of its narrative and language, yet the individual behind it remains so elusive. It's a paradox, isn't it? Almost as if the work itself sort of transcends its creator, taking on a life entirely its own.
Well, absolutely. What's truly fascinating here is just the sheer volume of discussion Homer's history has generated over the centuries. I mean, think about it. Critics will allow belief without controversy in Shakespeare's personality, his life, his very existence, largely because, well, we have documented evidence, even if it's sometimes sparse, of his life and career. But Homer's a different story entirely. The simple fact is we know virtually nothing concrete about him. There are stories, sure, like the one where he traveled to Chios to expose the Stortides, who was supposedly making a living reciting Homer's own poems. Funny, right? Or the tale of him meeting someone who knew him in Phocoa, helping him reach Pithys. But these are largely anecdotal, almost mythological themselves. You can't really pin them down. The Homeric question, whether Homer was a single identifiable author or maybe just a name attributed to a collection of works that evolves over time, that's central to understanding the very nature of this epic.
It's a question that has puzzled scholars for centuries, precisely because the evidence is so fragmented, forcing us to rely on inference and interpretation rather than solid biographical facts. For you, the listener, it's a striking reminder that some of the greatest creations can emerge from the most obscure origins.
So this idea then of Homer as a singular, identifiable person, like one solitary genius writing the Iliad from start to finish, that might actually be a relatively modern way of thinking about it. What did early scholarship suggest about where the Iliad came from, especially before, we had modern archaeology and linguistic tools?
Well, for a long time, there was this prominent idea, famously articulated by the classical scholar Richard Bentley. He suggested that Homer wrote a sequel of songs and rhapsodies to be sung by himself for small comings and good cheer at festivals and other days of merriment. The thinking was that these loose songs were not collected together in the form of an epic poem till about Pisistratus' time, about 500 years after. So this theory suggests a much more organic kind of piecemeal development of the Iliad, where individual heroic tales or scenes were performed orally by bards, maybe changed a bit each time, and then much later compiled into a grand narrative. It really challenges the notion of a single unified creative vision from the outset, doesn't it? It pushes the poem into the realm of a collective, evolving creation rather than a singular authorial statement. It implies that the Iliad might be less a written book and more like a crystallization of centuries of performance.
So like a collection of individual performances, almost like a series of jam sessions or improvisations by master musicians maybe, but ultimately resulting in something so incredibly structured and coherent. It feels almost improvised, like jazz, yet it possesses this intricate narrative and thematic unity. That's an uncanny thought in itself, that something so vast and intricate could emerge from what was initially perhaps a series of disparate, evolving pieces.
Precisely. And this view aligns perfectly with the ancient practice of poets singing their own verses. They often accompanied themselves on a harp, to elevate and inspire both themselves and their audience. Music was key. The oral tradition was incredibly powerful and sophisticated. We see this in other cultures too. For instance, the Jongariate of the Kalmucks is said to surpass the poems of Homer in length as much as it stands beneath them in merit, and yet it exists only in the memory of a people which is not unacquainted with writing. That just illustrates the immense capacity and enduring power of oral tradition, where entire epic narratives, sometimes far more extensive than anything written down, could be passed down and sustained across generations without needing written texts. The idea of performance, the act of a bard enchanting an audience with their voice and memory, that was absolutely central to poetry in that era. It made the Iliad a truly living, breathing text for centuries before it was ever really written down as we think of it. For you listening, it paints a picture of a world where stories lived in people's minds and voices, not just on parchment.
That makes perfect sense, especially when you think about the repetition, the epithets, those descriptive phrases like swift-footed Achilles or gray-eyed Athena, and certain formulaic lines that pop up again and again throughout the Iliad. That would have been incredibly helpful for memory in an oral tradition, right? Both for the bard performing and for the audience listening. But despite this really compelling argument for oral origins, the poem feels so cohesive, so unified. There must have been a strong counter-argument to this idea of fragmented origins.
Oh, absolutely. There's a very strong counter-argument, often called the case for unity. This perspective basically posits that the universal admiration of its unity by the better, the poetic age of Greece, almost conclusive testimony to its original composition. It emphasizes the overall artistic integrity and the profound thematic coherence of the Iliad. Proponents argue that such a masterpiece, with its meticulously crafted character arcs, its overarching plot, consistent tone, and profound thematic depth, well, it could only have sprung from a single guiding genius, not just cobbled together from independent songs. The way the grand narrative builds, with a clear beginning, middle, and end, and the way Achilles' wrath forms that single unifying thread through every book, it points strongly towards a unified artistic vision.
It's like arguing over whether a human body was assembled from, I don't know, spare parts or grew organically. To assume it was simply pieced together from individual limbs feels almost reductive, doesn't it? As if denying the very organic flow of life and the inherent design of a living thing.
That's a powerful analogy. And the argument is that the minute and analytical spirit of a grammarian is not the best qualification for the profound feeling, the comprehensive conception of an harmonious whole. And like Alexander Pope, who, translated Homer himself, famously observed, the critic eye, that microscope of wit, sees hairs and pores, examines bit by bit how parts relate to parts or they to whole. The body's harmony, the beaming soul, are things which Custer, Berman, Vossas shall see when man's whole frame is obvious to a flea. Basically, he's suggesting that an overly detailed microscopic analysis, obsessing over tiny inconsistencies, might cause you to entirely miss the grandeur. You miss the profound emotional impact, the sheer artistic achievement of the work as a complete unified entity. It's about stepping back and appreciating the forest, not just counting the leaves or examining the individual cells. For you, listening, it's a reminder that sometimes true understanding requires a broader, more holistic view.
Okay, so what about Pisistratus then? His supposed role in compiling the Iliad. For a long time, he was sort of credited with basically creating the epic by collecting these loose songs. If it wasn't a collection of disparate pieces being first put together in his time, what was his influence, according to more modern scholarship?
Well, more modern investigations, drawing on things like linguistic analysis and archaeological evidence, suggest something different. They suggest that a man may believe the Iliad to have been put together out of pre-existing songs, without recognizing the age of Pisistratus as the period of its first compilation. Instead, the literary employees of Pisistratus, basically, scholars working for him, must have found an Iliad that was already ancient. So this indicates that Pisistratus' efforts were probably more about standardizing or refining an existing text, perhaps arranging it for public recitation at festivals like the Panathenaea in Athens, rather than creating it from scratch. Think of it less as an editor assembling raw material, and more like a curator preserving and maybe perfecting an already cherished masterpiece. And the silence of the Alexandrine critics, those famous scholars at the Library of Alexandria, who meticulously studied and edited ancient texts centuries later. Their silence regarding a specific paisastratic recension, like a major editorial revision or standardized edition, further supports this. If such a foundational compilation had happened then, they surely would have noted it. Plus, everything in the two great Homeric poems, both in substance and in language, belongs to an age 2 or 3 centuries earlier than Pisistratus. That really distances his era from the poem's initial composition and reinforces its status as a profoundly ancient text.
This brings up an important question for us today, I think. Is it malicious exaggeration to dissect the work this way, to pull apart its perceived origins and question the very identity of its author? Is there a sacredness attached to the memory of the great and the good, which seems to bid us repulse these kinds of inquiries? It feels almost disrespectful sometimes to scrutinize the foundational myths of literature so thoroughly, almost like dismantling a beautiful antique just to examine its gears, you know?
It's a very valid concern, definitely, and it's a tension that scholars grapple with constantly. The idea is that excessive critical analysis can sometimes strip away the very magic or awe that a work inspires. When you focus only on the hairs and pores, as Pope put it, you risk losing sight of the beaming soul, the emotional resonance. However, for you, the learner, true understanding often requires a deeper inquiry, even if it challenges long-held beliefs. It's about appreciating the complexity, whether it's the product of a singular genius or the culmination of a rich oral tradition. The sacredness of the Iliad, I think, comes from the profound impact the work has had on human thought and culture for millennia. Not necessarily from an unassailable, simplistic origin story. The fact that these poems have captivated and shaped human thought for centuries, regardless of their precise origins, that's what truly makes them sacred and enduring. Understanding how they came to be, even if it's murky, only deepens our appreciation, I think.
Okay, the mystery around Homer himself is profound, but what's perhaps even more uncanny are the figures he brought to life, particularly the gods. They're often depicted in ways that are strikingly, almost alarmingly human, aren't they? They're far from abstract concepts or distant, all-powerful beings. They're active, intervening, and incredibly, almost uncomfortably flawed. It's this depiction, for me, that contributes so heavily to the uncanny feeling of the poem. They're so powerful, so divine, yet so familiar in their imperfections that they make us question the very nature of divinity.
Absolutely. What's truly fascinating here is that Homer wasn't just describing deities. He was, it's argued, the first who brought them into a system of machinery for poetry. This wasn't merely a theological exercise like a dry recounting of divine attributes. It was a deliberate artistic choice, a profound innovation that proved immensely influential on all subsequent literature and mythology. This system, full of divine interventions and relatable divine drama, has influenced everything from Greek tragedy to Roman epics, and even, you could argue, modern fantasy. Think about the way later playwrights and poets portray their supernatural elements often. It traces back to Homer's innovation in making the gods active, tangible participants in human affairs rather than distant, abstract forces. He brought the cosmic drama right into the human sphere.
And their flaws are so recognizable. It's not just that they have personalities, but they exhibit very human emotions, often in these exaggerated, almost grotesque forms. It's like looking into a distorted mirror reflecting our own worst traits sometimes.
Exactly. For instance, you see Juno's fury, her impotent of passion, constantly challenging Jove, her husband and king of the gods. She expresses rage that she's shook Iliad with alarms, assembled nations, set 2 worlds in arms. Only for Jove, with basically a wave of his hand, to intervene and thwart her plans. She's not just angry, she's seething with a very human-like frustration at her limited power compared to Jove's. It's palpable. She even threatens him directly, saying, "Should this arm prepare to wreak our hate on thy loved realms, remember Troy, and give the vengeance way." It's essentially a domestic squabble on a cosmic scale, fueled by jealousy and ambition rather than, divine justice or high moral principles. For you, the listener, it's a striking example of the sheer pettiness that can animate even those powerful beings.
Right. And it's not just anger. There's also Venus's vulnerability. She's the goddess of love and beauty, supposed to be almost ethereal, right? Yet she gets wounded by the mortal hero Diomedes on the battlefield. Actually wounded. When she's struck, Iris, the messenger goddess, has to come and aid her, and she has to beg Mars for his chariot to escape back to Olympus. And Mars himself, the god of war, gets wounded by Diomedes, too. How crazy is that? This isn't what you expect from immortal, all-powerful beings, is it? They bleed, they feel pain, they cry out, they need help. It humanizes them in a way that's almost disorienting, like seeing a perfectly crafted, emotionless robot suddenly just burst into tears.
Then there's Jove's capriciousness. I mean, he sends an evil dream to Agamemnon just to deceive him, leading the Greeks to a false sense of security and encouraging them towards battle, knowing full well the suffering it will cause. This isn't a benevolent, omniscient deity guiding humanity for its greater good. Not always, anyway. It's a powerful ruler who makes decisions based on momentary whims, personal obligations, or even affectionate pleas. Like when Thetis pleads with him for Achilles' honor and he grants her request, despite knowing it will bring further strife and suffering to the Greeks. It portrays a god whose will can be unpredictable, not unlike a powerful, flawed human monarch.
It almost sounds less like a divine pantheon and more like a really high-stakes political drama playing out on Mount Olympus, like a celestial soap opera.
It truly does. As classical scholars have observed, the gods formed a sort of political community of their own, which had its hierarchy, its distribution of ranks and duties, its contentions for power and occasional revolutions, its public meetings in the Agora of Olympus. This makes their divine world feel strangely relatable, like a very powerful, very dysfunctional family or maybe a fractious parliament, constantly bickering, forming alliances, and vying for influence. They hold public meetings in the Agora of Olympus, mirroring human assemblies, which further blurs the line between the divine and the mortal. This organizational structure gives their actions a strangely human motivation, moving beyond abstract divine will to something more akin to, well, petty politics.
And this incredible anthropomorphism, making them so human-like, leads to a really complex interplay of divine and mortal. How does this constant, intimate interaction between gods and humans actually manifest in the events of the poem? And how does it contribute to that uncanny feeling?
Well, one of the most striking examples is direct divine intervention. Like when Minerva appears to Achilles, unseen by others, to restrain his anger against Agamemnon. Some interpret that as the sudden recollection that he would gain nothing by intemperate wrath. So it's like an externalization of an internal thought process, a moment of self-reflection given divine form. It makes you wonder, is this truly a goddess, or is it just Achilles' conscience speaking? Similarly, Diomedes is granted the extraordinary power to see gods on the battlefield, and he's even commanded by Pallas Athena to wound Venus. But he's explicitly told to shun other gods unless Pallas gives a specific command. This is an incredible concession of power, right? Allowing a mortal to strike a deity, yet it's strictly bound by divine rules. It makes you, the listener, wonder how much is true divine power, and how much is maybe a poetic device to explain moments of exceptional human insight or prowess, blurring those lines between psychology and divinity.
But even with all their power, their rivalries, and their whims, these gods aren't entirely omnipotent, are they? They seem to be subject to something else, something bigger.
Indeed. Even the gods are not exempt from destiny or the fates. The German philosopher, Friedrich Schlegel, observed that a gloomy destiny sort of reigns throughout the Homeric poems. And the gods, though immeasurably higher than mortal man, yet compared with infinitude, they are on an equal footing with himself. This implies a higher, overarching force that even Jove, king of the gods, cannot simply set aside. He can influence it, certainly, like when he turns the golden scales of destiny, weighing the fates of Hector and Achilles. But he cannot completely disregard or overturn what fate has decreed. This limitation on divine power adds another layer to their uncanniness. They are immensely powerful, immortal, and capricious, but still bound by a cosmic order that even they must obey. It highlights that even for the gods, there are limits to their will, echoing the human struggle against an often predetermined existence.
This raises an important question for us, the audience. What does it mean for these powerful, immortal beings to be so fallible and so emotionally driven? It's almost human, but not quite, and that's precisely what's unsettling. It's like seeing a perfectly crafted automaton express genuine anger or fear, or maybe a sophisticated AI exhibiting clear signs of pity jealousy. It makes you question their true nature and how much agency they truly possess despite their divine status. The more human they become, the more their divinity seems to slip into that uncanny valley, making them feel disturbingly real, yet fundamentally alien.
It creates a fascinating tension, doesn't it? They are divine in their power and immortality, capable of feats beyond mortal comprehension, moving mountains, manipulating battlefields, instantly traveling across the cosmos. Yet they are profoundly human in their motivations and weaknesses. This blend is what makes them so compelling, and Yes, a little unsettling. They are a mirror of human nature, writ large and amplified, showing us our own best and worst qualities on an epic, immortal scale. The Iliad doesn't just tell us about gods, it tells us about power, emotion, and the unpredictable nature of will, whether human or divine. It forces you to consider what you would do with unlimited power if you still had very human emotions driving you.
So, turning to the humans then, what does this all mean for the heroes caught in this divine drama? They are described as godlike, divine, sprung from a goddess by a man's embrace, or loved by Jove, embodying the absolute peak of human strength and glory. But critically, they also demonstrate profound imperfections and very relatable struggles. They are magnificent, larger than life, yet deeply disturbingly flawed. That's where the uncanny really takes hold for the human characters, I think.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Homer's characters are undeniably complex. Critics have, for centuries, pointed out the vicious and imperfect manners of his heroes, their flaws and moral ambiguities. But is this a strange partiality to antiquity, to criticize them for it, as if ancient heroes should adhere to modern sensibilities? Or does it actually make them more compelling and enduring? I would definitely argue the latter. It is precisely these imperfections, these very human struggles, that make them resonate across millennia. They aren't idealized statues. They are raw, passionate individuals driven by pride, grief, and sometimes pure irrationality. You, the listener, can recognize parts of yourself or people you know in their actions.
That complexity is certainly evident in how Homer portrays the many faces of courage. It's not just one thing, is it? It's wonderfully diversified in the Iliad, reflecting different motivations, different expressions, and even different limitations. This range makes their heroism feel deeply textured rather than just a flat, unwavering virtue.
Indeed. Take Achilles, for example. His courage is described as furious and intractable. It's driven profoundly by his ego and a consuming, almost sacred wrath. We see this right at the beginning when he withdraws from battle after Agamemnon seizes Briseis, his prize of war. He abandons his comrades, lets them suffer immense losses, despite being offered vast treasures and elaborate apologies later on. His mother, Thetis, she truly mourns his fate, lamenting, "So short a space the light of heaven to view, so short a space, and filled with sorrow too." For him, knowing his glory comes at the cost of a short life. His rage is so consuming that he actually wishes not one Trojan might be left alive, and not a Greek of all the race survive. Might only we the vast destruction shun, and only we destroy the accursed town. Whoa, that isn't just about winning. It's about absolute destructive indignation, a personal affront taken to its most extreme and devastating conclusion. It's an almost inhuman level of rage, yet it springs from deeply human pride.
Then you have Diomedes. He's forward, yet listening to advice, and subject to command. A very different feel. He performs astounding feats on the battlefield, even wounding gods, as we discussed. Yet he knows when to retreat, acknowledging the limits of human might against divine intervention. He famously says, "'Tis not with Troy, but with the gods ye fight." His courage is tempered with wisdom, a pragmatic understanding of when to push forward and when to pull back. It makes him a hero of intelligent bravery, not just brute force. He embodies a more measured, strategic heroism, a really stark contrast to Achilles' all-consuming fire.
Exactly. And you also have Ajax, described as heavy and self-confiding, a massive, unyielding bulwark against the Trojan advance, famous for his defensive strength. His courage is stubborn and resolute, a raw, almost elemental force of resistance, like a rock. And then Hector, who's active and vigilant, deeply committed to Troy despite knowing his own death is coming in Achilles' hand, and despite constantly chiding his brother Paris for his failings. His poignant scene with Andromache, where she begs him to stay for her and their son, knowing sure such courage length of life denies. That sure showcases his tragic dedication and the profound human cost of his heroism. His commitment to his city and family is unwavering, even facing certain doom, highlighting a different, more self-sacrificing kind of bravery.
And the leaders. Like Agamemnon, he's inspirited by love of empire and ambition, driving the war not just for justice, maybe, but for power and personal gain, demonstrating a more politically motivated form of courage, sometimes bordering on cowardice even, while Menelaus, whose cause the war technically is, shows courage mixed with softness and tenderness for his people, portraying a more compassionate, albeit still formidable, type of bravery. Each hero embodies a different facet of what it means to be brave in the crucible of war, showing us that courage itself isn't a simple concept, but a complex human response.
And this brings us to the core conflict, Achilles' wrath. This opens the entire poem and serves as its driving force. It begins with the initial spark. Apollo sends a plague on the Achaeans because Agamemnon insulted Chryses, Apollo's priest, by refusing to return his daughter Chryseis. Even though the generous Greeks their joint consent declare the priest of reverence and release the fair, they all agreed it was the right thing to do. But Agamemnon's immense pride then leads him to take Briseis, Achilles' prize of war, as compensation for giving up Chryseis. This single act is the immediate catalyst for Achilles' monumental fury. What's truly uncanny here is how such a catastrophic chain of events, a plague, a war, countless deaths, is triggered by something as fundamentally human as a squabble over honor and, well, women. It reveals the profound, almost absurd fragility of the human ego, amplified to cosmic proportions.
And what about Achilles' stubbornness? It's just breathtaking. Despite Nestor's wise counsel, Nestor advises, basically, kings should be just. You have the honor of war. Agamemnon has the majesty of power. And despite Agamemnon's later incredibly generous offers like 7 women, golden tripods, 20 shining cauldrons, horses, even marriage to one of his daughters with 7 cities as dowry, Achilles remains utterly unmoved. He refuses everything. It's this almost unyielding, terrifying refusal to compromise.
Which raises the question, why does he refuse? The Greek law of honor at the time often accepted pecuniary compensation, like financial payment for injuries or insults. Achilles' refusal goes way beyond typical honor. It's a profound rage uncontrolled, almost a sacred vow to himself. It's a defiant act of self-immolation, really, that makes him blind to himself and useless to his host. His anger is so absolute that no material wealth or political appeasement can possibly mollify it. It's a fundamental breach of trust and a deep personal affront that he simply cannot forgive, making him withdraw entirely from the conflict despite the dire consequences for his fellow Greeks. His pride is monumental and almost inhuman force unto itself, yet it springs from a very human sense of injustice. For you, it highlights the terrifying power of human ego when it becomes an all-consuming fire.
And while Achilles is off sulking, we shift to the Trojan counterpart. We see Hector, the noble champion of Troy, chiding his brother Paris for running away from Menelaus in their duel. He says Paris's figure promised with a martial air, but ill thy soul supplies a form so fair. Ouch. Basically, you look good, but you're a coward. Paris, in turn, kind of defends his passion for Helen, acknowledging Venus's gifts and influence. The duel between them, which was supposed to solve the whole war, is ultimately thwarted by Venus, who just whisks Paris away, pulling him from the battlefield just as Menelaus is about to defeat him. Poof. This divine meddling leads directly to the breaking of the truce, orchestrated by Minerva at Juno's urging when the Trojan archer Pandarus wounds Menelaus with an arrow. This single act of treachery, manipulated by the gods, reignites the war with renewed fury, demonstrating how easily human agreements are shattered by divine whims and human failings.
The battle's escalation then truly begins in earnest. Agamemnon rallies the Greek troops, moving among them, encouraging the brave and shaming the fearful, crying, "Shame to your country, scandal of your kind." Diomedes' Aristeia, his big moment of supreme excellence and glory in battle, a truly defining sequence for him, is a major highlight. That's where he is empowered by Pallas Athena to wound both Venus and Mars themselves, as we mentioned. Just incredible. It's truly uncanny. A mortal striking gods, yet doing so with divine permission. Hector, meanwhile, aware of the gravity of the situation, returns to Troy and has that incredibly poignant meeting with his wife Andromache and their son Astyanax. That scene just vividly illustrates the human cost of war, showing his deep love for his family alongside his unwavering commitment to his city. Later, Hector challenges the Greeks to single combat, and the mighty Ajax accepts. Their duel ends only because night falls, giving everyone a temporary reprieve from the brutal fighting.
Then, in a critical turning point, the tide turns. Zeus intervenes directly, tipping the scales heavily in favor of the Trojans. He actually forbids the other gods from aiding the Greeks. Despite this overwhelming divine interference, Diomedes and Ulysses undertake that daring night raid into the Trojan camp. They capture the Trojan spy Dolon and the magnificent horses of Rhesus, gaining valuable intelligence and spoils, a little victory against the odds. But the next day, Agamemnon fights valiantly but is wounded, as are Diomedes and Ulysses, leaving the Greeks in really desperate straits and seemingly confirming Zeus's predetermined will. It's a striking example of how human bravery can persist, even in the face of what seems like divine inevitability.
And this dire situation, which is a direct consequence of Achilles' withdrawal, leads to Patroclus' sacrifice. Disturbed by the Greek losses and driven by compassion for his friends, Patroclus persuades Achilles to let him wear Achilles' famous armor into battle, hoping to rally the demoralized Greeks. He drives the Trojans back with immense force. He even kills Sarpedon, a son of Zeus. But then, blind to fate and maybe overcome by his success, he exceeds Achilles' specific command to just protect the ships. He pushes too far, and he's ultimately killed by Hector, with help from Apollo. This is the moment that shatters Achilles' self-imposed isolation. It's a truly tragic human sacrifice brought about by hubris, fate, and maybe the original pride of Achilles himself. For you, it underlines the devastating ripple effects of one hero's pride.
Patroclus' death provokes Achilles' grief and return. His reaction is just immense. He falls into deep lamentation, his grief mirroring the suffering he allowed by withdrawing. It's raw, visceral. His mother, Thetis, seeing his sorrow, commissions Vulcan, the divine smith, to forge new, magnificent armor for him, including that incredible shield that depicts the entire cosmos like a microcosm of the world itself. Armed anew, Achilles returns to battle, no longer a sulking hero, but an absolute force of nature. He slaughters Trojans indiscriminately, even fighting the river god Scamander, who rises against him in this terrifying display of elemental wrath. His rage is now directed entirely at Hector, and his vengeance is relentless and terrifyingly efficient. This transformation from man to avenging force is profoundly uncanny.
And the epic culminates in the final duel and ransom. The confrontation between Achilles and Hector is the emotional and narrative climax of the entire poem. Hector, despite knowing his fate, Achilles actually prophesies it at his death, saying, "Phoebus and Paris shall avenge my fate, and stretch thee here before the Scaean gate." He bravely faces Achilles alone, only to fall to the greater warrior. Achilles then cruelly drags Hector's body around Patroclus' tomb, an act of extreme barbarity driven by his overwhelming grief and desire for vengeance. It's shocking. Finally, King Priam, Hector's aged father, groveling on the ground in grief, goes alone to Achilles, guided by the god Hermes, to ransom Hector's body. And Achilles, remembering his own aging father Peleus back home, he relents. In this profound moment of shared humanity, shared grief, they share a meal, a temporary truce in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. The poem ends with Hector's funeral rites, marking a somber temporary peace, but with the awful knowledge that the war and its tragedies will inevitably continue. This final scene, where human grief transcends the brutal animosity of war, is one of the most powerful and deeply human moments in the entire epic.
And the poem also kind of hints at the fates of other heroes beyond the immediate narrative, doesn't it? It reminds us that the human story continues, full of triumphs and tragedies, long after the main epic concludes. We learn that Achilles himself dies later by an arrow in his heel shot by Paris, just as Hector prophesied. Priam is killed by Pyrrhus, Achilles' son, during the brutal sack of Troy. Ajax commits suicide after losing Achilles' armor to Ulysses in a contest for it. And Helen, after Paris' death, marries his brother Deiphobus before eventually being reunited with Menelaus, her original husband. These brief mentions provide this haunting coda illustrating the relentless march of fate and the ongoing human consequences of the war. So these heroes, they're presented as the absolute peak of human strength and glory, almost godlike in their prowess and lineage. But their raw emotions, their susceptibility to petty grievances, and their inevitable mortality make them so deeply, painfully human. It's almost a contradiction. Beings of epic scale, possessing superhuman strength and skill, yet so relatable in their flaws, their pride, their grief, and their often irrational decisions. That's the uncanny element at play, isn't it? They are both larger than life and agonizingly, intimately familiar, creating this disquieting blend of awe and recognition for you, the listener.
It creates a sense of profound realism, despite all the fantastical elements, the gods and monsters. Homer's genius, I think, lies in portraying heroes who, for all their strength, their divine favor, and their immense capabilities, are still driven by envy, pride, and sorrow. Their imperfect manners aren't a defect in the poetry, but a testament to its enduring insight into human nature. You see their strength, their magnificent feats on the battlefield, but you also see them weeping, throwing tantrums, acting irrationally, allowing personal slights to dictate the fate of entire nations. This makes them not just admirable, but truly understandable and enduring figures, because they reflect the very real complexities and contradictions of our own human condition. So the Iliad is not just a story of war and heroes. It's really a testament to the enduring power of language and storytelling itself. It's a masterclass in how narratives can transcend their immediate context and speak to universal human experiences across millennia. Yeah, stepping back from the narrative for a second, consider this. Homer is celebrated for his invention, for his unparalleled imaginative capacity. It's often said that no author or man ever excelled all the world in more than one faculty. And as Homer has done this in invention, Virgil has in judgment. Now, this isn't to say Homer lacked judgment, far from it, but that his inventive genius was his defining trait. His singular ability to conjure vivid scenes, complex characters, and intricate plots from the raw material of myth and legend. It's astounding. His imagination gave birth to a whole literary tradition, defining what epic poetry could be for centuries to come. He didn't just tell a story. He created the mold for how stories of grand scale could be told.
And his mastery of language, his poetic diction, is just legendary.
Oh, indeed. Homer is acknowledged as the father of poetical diction. He masterfully uses epithets, those short descriptions. But they're not just labels, are they? They're like miniature poems in themselves. Take Corythioeolus for Hector's helmet. It vividly conveys the motion of its plumes, adding a sense of his dynamism in battle. You can almost see it bobbing. Or Inosyphilos for Mount Nereitis, literally leaf-shaking, which doesn't just describe a mountain, but evokes the sound and movement of the wind rustling through its trees. These aren't just decorative. They were probably mnemonic devices for the oral poet, tools for vivid imagery and rhythmic elements that add depth and imagery with concise elegance. They could speed the narrative or slow it for emphasis. He also varied his versification by drawing from different Greek dialects to beautify and perfect his numbers, creating this rich, flexible, and sonorous language that could adapt to the emotional and narrative demands of the poem. It allowed for both the grandeur of battle and the intimacy of grief. This linguistic dexterity allowed him to create a unique and captivating rhythm for his epic, shaping the very sound of heroism.
Which brings us to the art of translation. Translating Homer must be an immense task, given his linguistic richness and, the vast cultural distance between ancient Greece and any modern audience. Pope, who we mentioned, himself a celebrated translator of the Iliad, acknowledged the challenges. He noted that no literal translation can be just to an excellent original in a superior. Basically, word for word doesn't cut it. He recognized faults in his own translation compared to, say, Chapman's fine, bold, rough, old English version, yet he still asserted that few books have read its fellow. He knew he'd done something significant. This makes you, the listener, wonder, how much of the original Homer do we truly experience through translation? Does the translation itself maybe contribute to that uncanny feeling being almost the same, but subtly different, like a familiar face seen through a distorting mirror, or a voice speaking a recognizable language but with an unplaceable accent?
That's a profound point, and it's something translators wrestle with constantly. The challenge of capturing the sound to the sense and varying it on every new subject is one of the most exquisite beauties of poetry, and attainable by very few. It's incredibly hard. Translators have to make difficult choices. Do you prioritize literal accuracy, the poetic flow, the emotional impact, cultural relevance for today's readers? Each decision inevitably shapes the reader's experience, creating a version of Homer that is both familiar and subtly alien. Pope's own efforts to beautify and perfect his numbers by drawing from different dialects and adjusting for smoothness or strength, that highlights this constant negotiation between fidelity and artistry. So yes, absolutely, the translation process itself can induce that uncanny feeling. It attempts to bridge this vast chasm of time and culture, presenting something both recognizable and subtly transformed, like a shadow or an echo of the original.
And beyond the literary techniques, just consider Homer's broader, almost unparalleled influence. It's staggering.
It's monumental. It's been said it was Homer who formed the character of the Greek nation. No poet has ever, as a poet, exercised a similar influence over his countrymen. Think about that. While other nations were shaped by prophets and lawgivers who dictated moral codes or social structures, the Greeks were fundamentally shaped by a poet. His stories provided a moral compass, a historical framework, and a definition of heroism that permeated their entire society for centuries. He gave them their heroes, their gods, and a shared understanding of their place in the world. This impact was so profound that it lasted even in the period of their degeneracy, continuing to define what it meant to be Greek even when their political power waned. Homer's narratives were their education, their entertainment, and their spiritual guide all rolled into one, making him arguably the central architect of Greek identity.
It's a remarkable legacy. It suggests that stories, even those filled with unsettling divine interventions and deeply flawed heroes, have this unique and profound power to shape who we are, individually and collectively. We're invited, through the Iliad, to fight over the same battles, woo the same loves, burn with the same sense of injury as an Achilles or a Hector. Through his words, we relive their conflicts and their passions, connecting us intimately to a world millennia away, allowing us to find ourselves somehow in these ancient tales. So we've traversed the legendary plains of Troy, we've delved into the complex personalities of both gods and heroes, and explored the enduring mystery of Homer himself. The Iliad offers us not just a recounting of ancient battles, but really a profound window into timeless questions about human nature, the capricious hand of fate, and the very act of artistic creation.
It really pushes us to consider what it means to be heroic, what defines justice in a world full of conflicting wills, and how much control, if any, we truly have over our own destinies. the subtle uncanny valley sensations we find within its verses, those almost human gods, the nearly perfect heroes who are so achingly flawed, the familiar emotions playing out on these alien scales, they only make the experience more compelling, more thought-provoking. They prevent the poem from becoming just a dusty historical artifact, keeping it alive, relevant, and disturbingly resonant for you today.
Perhaps the Iliad's true uncanny valley lies in its ability to present a world so similar to our own in its core emotions and conflicts, yet populated by beings and forces just beyond our full comprehension. And it leaves us with this final, provocative thought to consider. Does the enduring power of a story come from its perfect historical accuracy, or from its uncanny ability to reflect our deepest human experiences and psychological truths, regardless of how real its specific details may seem? It's a question that Homer, through his masterpiece, really forces us to confront. Thank you for joining us on the Uncanny Valley podcast.